In April of 2014, the Haikyuu anime debuted its first ever episode. Since then, it has garnered a ginormous fan base, so large, in fact, that volleyball has increased in popularity in multiple different countries. And deservedly so. Haikyuu is not just one of my favorite animes ever, it's one of my favorite shows of all time. However, the brilliance of the show oftentimes overshadows the brilliance of the original manga, which I believe is a mastery in so many things, such as paneling, anatomical art, and character arc progression. And in this series, we're going to talk about it all. This is the Giant Haikyuu Review. Now, before we get started, let's talk about how this series is going to work. I'm going to analyze these mangas in a similar way to how I analyze plays, which is something I've been doing for a very, very long time. Really getting into the nitty-gritty of the story. Why do these characters say or do the things that they do? How does this play into their character arcs? How does the character arcs weave into the overall story? Things like that. So to talk about as much as I want to talk about, every episode is going to be a different volume of the manga. So episode 1 is going to be volume 1, episode 2, volume 2, and so on and so forth. Yes, I am aware there are 45 volumes, so there are going to be 45 episodes of this, but I am really, really excited. Going this deep into this story, I think is going to help me a lot as a storyteller, especially since I want to draw and write my own comics in the style of manga and anime in the future. So yeah, that's why it's called the Giant Haikyuu Review. We're going to talk about what makes these stories so great. Why is Haikyuu in itself just so awesome? This first episode is going to be a little bit different, however. We're not going to be talking about volume 1, we're just going to be talking about chapter 1. Since chapter 1 of anything is the most important, whether you're writing plays, novels, short stories, mangas, comics, you name it, chapter 1 is the most important. We learn who the character is, why are they here, what is the world, how does the character relate to the world, and how is the world going to change the character, or how is the character going to change the world? All this stuff is set up in the first chapter, and that's what we're going to talk about today in Haikyuu. Haikyuu began serialization in February 20th of 2012 with the weekly Shonen Jump magazine. It ended in July 20th of 2020 and was written by Hariuchi Furudate, who began his career at age 25. His first ever series was known as Philosophy School, Yatsuya Sensei's Ghost Stories. However, his first hit manga was Haikyuu. And here's how it starts. The first panel we see in the story is just the most simplistic way of explaining what volleyball is. Basically just saying, Haikyuu, also known as volleyball, there's a net, you get 3 touches, you either receive or you attack, you either win or you lose. Kinda like that. After we get introduced into volleyball, we then get introduced into our main character, which I'm gonna tell you his name, it's Shoujo Hinata. There you go. A little bit of a spoiler that happens later on in the chapter. In this monologue, Hinata talks about a tall, tall wall that looms over him.
目の前に立ちはだかるその向こうはどんな眺めだろうか頂の景色
Hinata just wants to reach the top and see the other side, which of course is a physical representation of volleyball when a player jumps up to spike the ball and they see the other side of the court unafflicted. But this is obviously more of a metaphorical wall. Hinata, through his own individual goals, wants to reach the top of the volleyball world. He wants to become the best player that he can be. Then we get into something that really Haikyuu is all about. Haikyuu's main story is intertwined with 2 things, individual improvement and team improvement. Hinata basically suggests in this monologue that these 2 things intertwine, saying, if I'm not alone, I can reach the top. We then get this awesome 2-page spread. It's one of my favorites in the manga where we see basically all the characters that we're just gonna fall in love with and have a great time with. The chapter officially starts with a flashback, which you can tell from the black outlines of the manga panels. It's kind of a universal sign of telling you, hey, we're in a flashback or we're in the past. Hinata's riding past this television screen, which you would see in maybe like a display at like Best Buy or something, and he hears talking of Kurosano's little giant. It's quite obviously inspiring Hinata from what we see from his facial expressions in the paneling and from his words in his monologue. Hinata talks about reminiscing about the little giant scoring point after point and how he stood there in awe, and then immediately, as soon as you turn the page, bam! 3 months later, somebody's spiking the ball. It looks awesome. Just immediately, the paneling is just so good. You don't really know who is spiking the ball, but the way that his hand is like behind him and you see like the impact of the ball and you see its follow through is just, man, it's really good. After we get a couple of glimpses of the gymnasium, we then get introduced once again to our protagonist, Shoyo Hinata, which was the main character who was prologuing before. Furudate is really hitting at this part of the story that this is Hinata's first ever volleyball tournament. He's also hinting that it's his last. Hinata says stuff like, it's my 3rd year and I finally, hey, I can't help it, this is my first real tournament. The chapter is called Endings and Beginnings, which is so fitting because this is the beginning of Hinata's volleyball career, and it could also be the end. We're also getting some hints here that Hinata's friends that he's brought along aren't very experienced in volleyball. Actually, the first thing we hear from him is that he says, I smell that icy hot spray, which is like, you're getting excited about that? You know, like it's just a regular athletic kind of smell. But from what it seems, Hinata's school doesn't really have a volleyball team. Hinata kind of put together a group of his friends and then dragged them along to this volleyball tournament. Him just thanking them for being there and them talking about, hey, you just explained the rules to us, don't expect anything big, is kind of showing us that. It also doesn't help that their first opponent is Kitagawa Daiichi, which is the school that they're going to face. And they look serious. They look like they mean business. And you can tell that they mean business by the lines, the manga lines that are kind of going down their characters. That kind of means that they're either very somber or very serious, which we can assume it's the latter. We then get a shot of who eventually will be our secondary protagonist, Tobio Kageyama, also known as the King of the Court. He looks serious. He looks mean. He has like shadows everywhere. He has gray shadows, darker gray shadows. It looks awesome. Hinata then kind of expresses, doesn't really matter how serious they are. I'm confident in my jumping skills, and as long as we believe, we have a possibility of beating them, which isn't necessarily wrong. In sports, there is always the possibility that you could beat someone. The probability, however, is a little bit less likely to happen. We then see a nice little funny character trait of Hinata, which will continue on until I think probably the end of the series. I don't quite remember. When he gets nervous, he has to go to the bathroom, and for some reason, he always runs into conflict when he wants to go to the bathroom. It's super weird, but I actually really like it as a storytelling element. He then gets made fun of by some of the players of that other team, and then Tobio Kageyama, he steps in and doesn't really defend him, but tells them to stop slacking off. We then get the first meeting of our two protagonists, who, from what we've seen in the past couple of pages, could not be more different. From what we've seen so far, Hinata is very uplifting and cheery towards his friends, even though they're not really volleyball players and they're not slacking off, but they're not the best. They're not taking this 100% seriously, I would say. Kageyama, however, he's been very strict with the people that we've seen them with, even when they haven't been slacking off that much. So already we have a dichotomy between these two. Kageyama says a couple of things to Hinata that are very important to the story. This is the first time he's ever touched on his height. Kageyama tells Hinata, "Don't you know how important height is?" Which is a main theme of the story, is that Hinata is short compared to the average volleyball player. Hinata, when he was talking about that giant wall in front of him, he was meaning it also literally, that it's hard for him to jump that height. It's more work for him than for others, so he has to work harder than anybody else, which is also a great way to make us root for him. We want to root for the underdog, and in this scenario, that's Hinata. However, against all of their differences, Kageyama and Hinata, they find common ground in saying, I want to win so that I can continue playing volleyball. Hinata says we're gonna win and win to play a ton of games, enough to make up for all the ones I couldn't play before. Kageyama kind of agrees in this sentiment, saying, I'm going to be the one who wins and gets to stay on the court. Hey guys, this is just me recording from my phone real quick. This is what's gonna happen if I forget something, which is what just happened with this scene. Hinata tells Kageyama that it doesn't matter if he's short because he can fly, which the word fly holds so much importance in the story of Haikyuu. I'm genuinely baffled that I missed it the first time, but yeah, it's a phrase that's just used throughout the entire series, so I just wanted to point that out. It holds so much importance to the school that Hinata eventually goes to. So yeah, just wanted to talk about it. Back to the video. A whole bunch of exposition happens talking about Kageyama, who he is, what position he plays, which is a setter, which is basically the person who sets everybody up. That's the simplest way of explaining it. The game is then about to start, and even in the lineups, you can completely tell the difference of everything that's happening. Kirigawa Daichi's team, they look completely serious, completely ready to play, like they've played 1,000 games before. And Hinata's team, yeah, they don't look too confident. They don't look that great. In the next page, we actually get some future characters that we're going to be introduced to later on. I love when mangas do this. It's a great way of connecting the story, and it's a great way for readability too, to read this and go, hey, I know those characters. We won't talk about them too much now. I don't know if you guys are watching this without having already read it or watched it, but yeah, I just won't say their names just for suspense sake. After the game starts, Hinata's team kind of scrambles the ball into a position for Hinata to jump, and as soon as he jumps, bam, flashback. This is going to happen a lot in this series. Right when you think you're getting to the climax of it, they hit you with a flashback, and I actually think it works better in the manga. In the anime, sometimes it disrupts the flow of how the game is going on. However, in the manga, it doesn't really, especially since you're going at your own pace. But yeah, this flashback is basically instating in our minds what we kind of already guessed. Hinata, inspired by the little giant, tried to create his own volleyball club at his school. However, he'd be the only member. Nobody really was interested in that. They offer him to join the girls' team, which he kind of shies away from. He's like, oh no, no thanks. This flashback is basically telling us Hinata tried to practice in any way that he could possible, asking his friends really annoyingly, like, hey, do you want to play with me? And they're like playing soccer or another sport, and they're like, dude, seriously, we're just trying to do our own thing. But his friends are really nice, and they eventually help him out. In Hinata's third year, there are 3 freshmen who want to join the club, and he gets all emotional about it, and finally he's found enough people to have this volleyball team, and then immediately, bam, we're back into the game. Hinata jumps into the air, and we get this awesome panel of Hinata flying in the air with this cool little whoosh sound. And the detail in this panel, the way that he's also kind of out of the panel, which is just a really great way of Hinata basically jumping out of the panel like at you, which surprises the other people in the stadium. It surprises the high schoolers, it surprises Kageyama, who says, oh, he really actually meant he could jump that high. However, to Hinata's dismay, he immediately gets blocked, which is a complete shock to him. He's never been blocked before. He's never really played with anybody else before, so he's probably only done spikes that have gone through. He's never been blocked before, which I'm sure is a really guttural feeling. For immediately his first ever spike to get blocked like that in such a devastating way, it would probably be very heartbreaking. However, Hinata once again shows that he is very uplifting, and he's like, it's okay, we'll get the next one. And then immediately in the next page, we see that the score is 22-7. which is a little bit of a wipeout. Hinata comments on how the wall seems to be getting larger and larger, basically saying the more he jumps, the tired he's getting, and the harder it is to basically get past this wall. Once again, we get a look at the dichotomy of Hinata and Kageyama. Hinata is down by a whole bunch of points and is still uplifting his team. Kageyama, however, has nothing but complaints. He tells this kind of onion-haired looking dude to move faster and do better, basically all this stuff. So he's a very cranky volleyball player. The other players basically say, take it easy, man. The other players don't know what they're doing, but Kageyama is still very focused, very insistent on doing the best that they can. We also see this just awesome panel of Hinata trying to go for a volleyball, even though we definitely know he's not going to get there. But the panel is awesome because the floor kind of looks like this 360 version of it, and we're able to see like Hinata's fingers getting closer towards the volleyball, and it just looks so great. Once again, the art in here is amazing, and I'm going to be praising it for the next 45 episodes. Hinata's teammates basically tell him that he needs to take it easy, that they're not going to win this match, and there's no reason to be going for balls like that. And then we get what I think is one of the best panels of the manga in general. It looked awesome in the anime, and it looks awesome in the manga. Hinata's absolute deadpan stare saying, "We haven't lost yet, right?" Basically saying there is still a chance. There is always still a chance, which is great sentiment. Once again, in practicality, however, it's probably not going to happen. Kageyama earlier in the chapter basically told Hinata that it's much harder not to give up, especially when you're getting beaten this badly. And it's kind of ticking him off that he's not giving up, that he still has that cheery attitude. Hinata then actually gets a point. These series of panels look really, really great. He's staring down Kageyama in the eyes. Kageyama saying, "He stole a point from us," very reminiscent of Hinata. Once again, these two could not be more opposite. But in terms of the game, in terms of volleyball, they're in completely different scenarios, but they still have the same sentiment. It's not over until it's over. Hinata's friend then botches a set, which Kageyama thinks, oh, nobody's over there, so it's not going to happen. And then the next page, bam, once again, another great panel. Man, this is a really good chapter. Hinata shows his fantastic reflexes that he really touted at the beginning of this chapter. Kageyama basically says, he was on the left. How in the blink of an eye did he get to the right? This is basically telling us that Hinata has great athletic ability. He just does not know how to use it in a volleyball sense, which we see later on. Hinata spikes it. Once again, another awesome panel. I don't need to tell you that every time, but God, it looks so great, especially with the shadows and the lines. It's awesome. He amazes his teammates. He amazes the opponents. He amazes the high schoolers, but his shot was out. That was the point that made them lose the game. We then get this really emotional moment where Kageyama basically says, "What have you been doing these last 3 years?" Basically telling him, you have amazing talent, but you haven't been using it. I don't think the idea that Hinata doesn't have a volleyball-loving school really passes through Kageyama, since Kageyama is, and what we'll eventually learn in the story, is only volleyball. He's all volleyball, nothing else. I really think it was sweet that Hinata's friends were trying to stand up for him. His friends obviously very much care about Hinata, and just a really, really wholesome group of friends who decided, even though they know nothing about the sport, decided to kind of make Hinata's dreams come true. Really, really nice touch. I just wanted to touch up on that Hinata's friends are awesome. Hinata then expresses basically one of the main cores of this story. We still have only two options, to win or to lose. And if we lose, we can't stay out there on the court anymore. In the sport, there is always a winner and there's always a loser. And the one who loses is the one that goes home. Hinata then confronts Kageyama. We get this just gorgeous panel of him crying. Like, it looks great. I don't know what else to say. Furudate's art is just From his facial expressions to the way that he shows spikes, it's so clean, and it looks amazing top to bottom. Hinata says, "Then someday I'm gonna beat you, and I'm gonna be the one who gets to stay on the court longer than anybody else." Thus creating a rivalry similar to Goku and Vegeta, similar to Sasuke and Naruto, similar to Bakugo and Deku, so on and so forth. You could name all of them. However, in terms of protagonists, Kageyama is very different. Hinata and Kageyama are the two protagonists of this story. And even though Hinata is definitely the main protagonist, Kageyama is a definite close second, more so than many other characters in Shonen. I just mentioned Vegeta and Goku. There are whole arcs where Vegeta isn't even in. We barely stray away from Kageyama. So these two are our main characters. They're two complete opposites, but they're one and the same, which I really like from a storytelling standpoint. Kageyama tells Hinata, "If you want to beat me, you gotta get better," which is completely true. Kageyama speaking facts there. We then get this awesome montage, which is kind of spread out more in the anime. Here in the manga, we get just a couple of panels about him training with the female volleyball team at his school. And I think that's a really good character change, having Hinata work with the girls, because at the beginning, he was a little bit hesitant to do it because he was nervous. Maybe he was afraid he was going to be made fun of. But after this confrontation with Kageyama, he does not care. He just wants to become the best volleyball player he can be so that he can be ready for high school. I think that's really awesome, and it's a really small thing that I think you could miss really easily. Hinata then graduates, says goodbye to his friends, and then the beginning of the story really happens. All of that we just talked about, that was a prologue, and now the real story starts. We then see Hinata at his new high school, Kurasuno High School, which is where the little giant used to play, that we learned earlier on in the chapter. We then get a look at the high schoolers who were watching the match earlier. Daichi, Suga, and Tanaka, who all have big parts to play in the story. They're kind of showing their shock at who's all signing up for their volleyball team. Hinata zooms to the gym to get a look at his domain. He thinks about Kageyama and how he's going to train so hard here and beat his nemesis. It's going to be awesome. It's going to be a battle for the ages. But then, a massive plot twist, which when I watched for the first time, I was like, what? It just didn't even pass through my brain. Kageyama is also at this school, and Hinata has a kind of mixture of bafflement and angry and just completely confused. As Hinata learns that Kageyama is at the same school as him, the monologue from the beginning is replaying, basically telling us that to reach the top, Hinata is going to have to work with Kageyama. The chapter ends how it says, Kurasuno High School, Gymnasium 2, practice begins in 25 minutes. Great end to the chapter. Makes you want to come back next week being like, oh gosh, what's going to happen in the next chapter? What's going to happen at practice? You know, stuff like that. In the volumes, we get this just nice, very beautiful picture and drawing of Hinata and his friends graduating, which is something that we actually see in the anime. So I'm really glad that they adapted that into the anime. I think that's awesome, because I love Hinata's friends. They're really great, and the fact that they weren't in the story, spoilers, that they're not in the story too much, is kind of sad, but you know, yeah. Overall thoughts on the chapter: a fantastic intro into this series. There are so many panels that are so detailed and just look fantastic. All of the spike shots just look amazing. I really thought it was interesting, the dichotomy between Hinata and Kageyama, how they were oh so different personality-wise, but when it comes to the pitch, they have the exact same mentality. Even though Kageyama was winning immensely, he still thought, we have to see this thing through the end. He stole a point from us. But then there's Hinata on the other side saying, it's not over yet. We can still win this. And even if not, we can still take some points away from them. It's a really great way of showing us how these two rivals aren't as different as they may think or seem. This chapter also sets up a very important part of Kageyama's backstory, as we will learn later on. His aggressiveness towards his teammates is definitely something that needs to be fixed at Karasuno. And as we'll learn later on, it's one of the reasons why his middle school career didn't quite take off exactly as planned. But as a first chapter, it told us everything we needed to know. We know who our main protagonists are, mainly Hinata, but also Kageyama. And we've learned about our main character traits from our main protagonists. Hinata is very uplifting and very giddy, and Kageyama is very stern and very serious. It's going to be interesting to see how these two butt heads, but then also reconcile. And then maybe butt heads again, and then reconcile again. You know the story, you know it. But yeah, you guys, I had a great time talking about this. Next episode, we start talking about the volumes. They won't be as in-depth as this one was, especially since there's a lot to touch on in every volume. Make sure you hit like, subscribe, go to the description below. I have podcasts, social media sites, all of that stuff, so on and so forth. There's a whole bunch of content here on the channel and on my other channels, so be sure to check that stuff out. And I'll catch you guys on the next Manga Theater. Bye, guys.